In the past, I've created some videos that have used JWT tokens to authenticate to a WooCommerce store. Here we have the simple JWT plugin installed on my site. I'm going to show you how it works, and then we're going to do a deep dive on that plugin to show you how to set it up. It's for JSON web tokens, and what you can do is you can pass a token like this into a request, and that will be used as your authentication. So what we do is we hit this endpoint and we authenticate with a username, an email and a password. So this user doesn't exist on my site anymore, so don't try to hack it. But essentially what we do is we do that authentication, and that creates a web token. So if we if we decrypt that web token, this is what it looks like. It contains my username, my user ID, username, etc., etc. Expiry date and when it was first created. So what we can do then is, if we've got an endpoint on our site, this actually is a custom endpoint I created that lists a number of orders, we can pass in that web token instead of a username and password to authenticate. Haven't got any orders using this particular user. Let's look at the JWT plugin now. So here it is. I'll include a link to the plugin. Let's go through the options. So on a lot of these things we're not going to look at today. So we're not going to register users, delete users, reset passwords. But what we are going to do is authentication and look at the general stuff. So the first thing to do is set a decryption key and decide how you want to pass your request tokens in. You can pass it in as a query string, you can put it in the header as a session, a cookie, or again put your bearer token in the header. The simplest route is to use JWT in the query string, as you can see here, like that. Login. You can use this to log into the site if you're just like a front-end user, but because we're using API calls, we're not going to look at login. We're not going to register users, so that's disabled. We're not going to delete users either, so that's disabled. We don't need to reset the password. But what we do need to do is authenticate. So we need to, by default, this is switched off. So allow authentication equals yes. Authentication requires auth code. I've said no to that. And then essentially what we're going to do is, this is this endpoint here, where we pass in username and password, the email and the password, and it generates a token for us. We can decide what payload is returned to us. If you remember here, that's the payload there. And then we can set the time to live. So the token will be valid for 60 minutes. You can refresh it and it'll be valid for a certain time. And then you can set the issuer, which was returned here. That's useful. You can check, you can use code to decrypt the tokens and only allow it if the issuer is equal to your current site. So that's something useful. You can refresh the token without having to log in again, just by passing the token in. It gives it another 60 minutes. You can revoke it, or you can validate it to see if it is a good valid token. Auth codes I haven't set. Hooks haven't set. Cause for cross-site scripting. Yeah, not really how to use that. Then we can protect the endpoints. I like to use another plugin called Disable REST API to protect the endpoints, but you can do it inside of JWT as well. So you can say yes, and you could protect certain endpoints if you wanted to. And there's some other advanced options in again, but I've never touched those. So essentially, what we're allowing is authentication via a username. That then becomes a token. We'll just pass that token back each time, and it makes working with WooCommerce APIs a lot more simple. So if you've got a a project even that requires authentication of an endpoint, I heartily recommend that you use JWT rather than usernames and passwords.